What's the longest you've ever stayed awake? 24 hours? 36? Now imagine doing that while standing on a narrow wall, 50 feet above ground, in complete darkness, knowing that enemy soldiers could be scaling the walls right now, and you're the only thing standing between them and a massacre. This was just Tuesday night for a medieval castle guard. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'm curious, where are you watching this right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Now, let me tell you exactly how this all unfolded. You wake up to someone shaking your shoulder roughly, not gently, not politely, but with the kind of urgency that says your life depends on being conscious right now. The straw beneath you rustles as you sit up in what can generously be called your bed, though it's really just a pile of hay in the corner of the guard barracks. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale ale, and something that might be cheese, but could just as easily be someone's rotting foot wrappings. The man shaking you is Garrett, a grizzled veteran whose face looks like it's been carved from old leather and bad decisions. His breath smells like onions and despair as he leans close to your ear. Your watch boy, North Tower, don't mess this up. That's it. No good luck wishes, no reassuring pat on the back. Just a grim reminder that failure means death. Not just yours, but potentially everyone sleeping peacefully in the castle below. You stumble to your feet, your joints protesting every movement. The floor is cold stone, and your bare feet immediately remind you that warmth is a luxury you can't afford. Around you, other guards are either preparing for their own watches or collapsing into the straw after finishing theirs. None of them look particularly well rested. None of them look particularly alive either. They move like ghosts, pale and hollow-eyed, going through the motions of a job that slowly drains the life from anyone foolish enough to take it. Your equipment is laid out on a wooden bench that's seen better decades. A spear that's more rust than metal, a helm that doesn't quite fit right and leaves pressure sores behind your ears, and a cloak that's supposed to keep you warm, but mostly just makes you look like a very poorly dressed scarecrow. You strap on your leather belt, heavy with a knife that you pray you'll never have to use, and a horn that you pray you will never have to blow. Both prayers, you suspect, might go unanswered. The walk to the North Tower takes you through the castle's interior, past stone corridors that echo with your footsteps and seem to amplify every nervous breath you take. Torches line the walls, but they're spaced far apart, creating pools of flickering light separated by stretches of deep shadow. The shadows move and dance in ways that make your mind see enemies where there are none. At least, you hope there are none. You pass the great hall, where the lord of the castle sleeps peacefully in his warm bed, surrounded by tapestries and comfort. You pass the kitchens, where tomorrow's meals are already being prepared by servants who will never know the terror of standing alone on a wall in the darkness. You pass the chapel, where you briefly consider stopping to pray, but time is not a luxury you have. Your watch started the moment Garrett woke you up, and being late to your post is just another way to end up dead. The castle around you is a labyrinth of stone and shadow, built not for comfort, but for defense. Every corridor is designed to confuse invaders, every staircase positioned to give defenders advantage, every room planned to serve the greater purpose of keeping enemies out and allies alive. Walking through it in the pre-dawn darkness, you feel like you're moving through the belly of some great stone beast, one that protects those it contains, but demands sacrifices in return. You've been serving as a guard for 3 months now, long enough to know the routines, but not long enough to become numb to the fear. Every night watch still feels like a test you might fail. Every shadow still seems to hide potential threats. Every sound still makes your heart race with adrenaline that has nowhere to go. The veteran guards tell you this feeling will fade with time. But you've noticed that the men who've been doing this job for years have a hollow look in their eyes, that suggests the fear never really goes away. It just burrows deeper, settling into your bones like a chronic ache. The castle employs 43 guards in total, divided into day and night shifts, with the night watch being considered the more dangerous and demanding assignment. The men who draw night duty are either new recruits who haven't earned better assignments, or veterans who've proven they can handle the psychological strain of standing alone in darkness for hours at a time. There's also a third category, guards who've been assigned to night watch as punishment for various infractions. Men who serve their dark hours with resentment and barely contain desperation. You fall into the first category, still green enough that your superiors want to test your mettle before trusting you with more prestigious daylight assignments. Every new guard has to prove they can handle night watch before they're considered for advancement, and the washout rate is high. Some men last a few weeks before requesting transfer to other duties. Others break on their first night, overcome by the isolation and responsibility. A few simply disappear, abandoning their posts and fleeing into the countryside rather than face another night on the walls. The North Tower rises above you like a stone finger pointing accusingly at the sky. Each step up the spiral staircase feels like a small death, your legs burning from the climb, your breathing becoming laboured in the thin air. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by countless guards who have made this same journey, night after night, year after year. Some of them made it back down, some of them didn't. The staircase is narrow, barely wide enough for one person, with walls that press in on you from both sides. If you meet someone coming down while you're going up, one of you has to flatten yourself against the wall and hope the other person doesn't accidentally push you off the edge. There's no railing, no safety measures, just stone steps that disappear into darkness above and below. The builders of this castle didn't waste time or resources on comfort. Every stone was placed with defense in mind, and if that made life harder for the defenders, well, that was just another test of their dedication. Halfway up, you pause to catch your breath, and that's when you hear it. A sound that makes your blood turn to ice water in your veins. It's faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. Metal on stone. The sound of weapons being drawn, or armor clanking, or grappling hooks finding purchase on castle walls. You strain your ears, pressing yourself against the cold stone, but the sound doesn't come again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was your imagination. Maybe it was an enemy force preparing to attack, and you're about to become the first casualty of a siege. You continue climbing, each step now weighted with dread. Your hand tightens on your spear, though you're not sure what good it would do you. You've had some training, sure, but mostly just how to hold the pointy end toward the enemy and try not to wet yourself in the process. Real combat is something entirely different, something brutal and chaotic, and nothing like the neat formations you practiced in the courtyard during daylight hours. The training you received before being assigned to guard duty was basic at best. A few weeks of learning to march in formation, some rudimentary weapon handling, and endless lectures about duty and honor that somehow failed to mention the soul-crushing terror of standing alone in the dark while your mind conjures threats from every shadow. They taught you how to stand at attention and how to recognize the uniforms of friendly forces, but they never explained how to tell the difference between an approaching enemy and a tree branch moving in the wind when you're running on 2 hours of sleep and your nerves are stretched to the breaking point. The castle's defensive strategy relies heavily on early warning systems, which means guards like you are essentially human alarm clocks, expected to spot threats before they become critical and alert the garrison in time for an effective response. It's a simple concept that becomes incredibly complex when you're actually trying to implement it in the middle of the night with limited visibility and an overactive imagination. False alarms are almost as dangerous as missed threats. Cry wolf too often and people stop responding. But miss a real attack and everyone dies. The pressure of making split-second decisions about life and death while operating on caffeine and terror is enough to drive anyone mad. The wind picks up as you climb higher, and you can feel the temperature dropping with each step. By the time you reach the top of the tower, your breath is visible in white puffs, and your fingers are already starting to go numb inside your thin gloves. The previous guard, a man named Thomas who looks older than his 25 years, is waiting for you with obvious relief written across his face. "Thank God," he mutters, already moving toward the staircase. "Nothing to report. Well, mostly nothing. Thought I saw movement in the forest about an hour ago, but it could have been deer, or bandits, or my eyes playing tricks on me. Hard to tell in this darkness." He pauses at the top of the stairs, turns back to you with an expression that's half sympathy and half dark amusement. "Good luck, boy. Try not to fall off." Thomas has been doing night watch for 2 years, which makes him practically ancient in guard terms. Most men don't last that long before the job breaks them one way or another. Looking at his hollow eyes and nervous mannerisms, you can see the toll it's taken. He twitches at every unexpected sound, constantly checks over his shoulder, and has developed a habit of muttering to himself during quiet moments. The other guards say he used to be cheerful and talkative, but night watch has burned that out of him, leaving behind a jumpy, paranoid shell of a man who sees threats everywhere. And then he's gone, his footsteps echoing down the staircase until they fade into silence, leaving you alone on top of the world, with nothing but darkness, wind, and the terrible responsibility of keeping watch over sleeping souls who have no idea how thin the line is between their peaceful dreams and violent death. The North Tower gives you a commanding view of the approach to the castle, which sounds impressive until you realize that on a moonless night like tonight, your commanding view is of absolutely nothing. The darkness is so complete it feels solid, like you could reach out and touch it. You can't see the forest where bandits might be hiding. You can't see the road where enemy armies might be marching. You can't see anything beyond the faint glow of your torch, which creates a small circle of light that only serves to make everything beyond it seem darker and more threatening. Your post is a section of the wall walk that runs along the top of the tower. It's about 6 feet wide, with a low parapet on one side that comes up to your waist. The parapet has gaps in it called crenellations, designed to let you shoot arrows or throw things at attackers. But right now they just let the wind whistle through with a sound like tortured souls. On the other side of the walk is a sheer drop to the courtyard below. 50 feet of empty air between you and stone that would turn your body into something resembling chunky soup. The parapet offers some protection from arrows and thrown weapons, but it also creates blind spots where enemies could potentially hide while scaling the walls. You have to regularly lean out through the crenellations to check the base of the tower, exposing yourself to any archers who might be positioned in the darkness beyond. It's a calculated risk. Stay hidden and miss approaching threats, or expose yourself to check for dangers you might not be able to see anyway. Either choice could get you killed, so you opt for the one that at least gives you the illusion of doing something useful. You begin your patrol, walking slowly from one end of your section to the other, eyes straining to pierce the darkness, ears straining to catch any sound that doesn't belong. Step by step, turn by turn, hour by hour. This is your life now. This is your world. A narrow strip of stone suspended between earth and sky, between safety and danger, between sanity and the kind of madness that comes from staring into darkness for too long. The castle below you is a complex organism, even in sleep. You can hear the faint sounds of servants moving through corridors, guards changing shifts in other towers, horses stirring in the stables. There's a rhythm to it all, a pattern of normal nighttime sounds that you're learning to recognize. Anything that doesn't fit this pattern immediately draws your attention, makes your heart race and your grip tighten on your spear. A door closing too loudly, footsteps where none should be, voices carrying conversations that seem too urgent for the hour. The torch you carry is your only companion, but it's not much of one. The flame flickers constantly in the wind, sometimes dying down to almost nothing before flaring back to life. each time it dims, your heart skips a beat, because losing your light means losing the only thing standing between you and complete helplessness. You've heard stories of guards whose torches went out during their watch, leaving them to stumble around in complete darkness, falling off walls or walking straight into enemy weapons they never saw coming. You try to conserve the torch by keeping it low, but that just makes the shadows deeper and more menacing. Every stone seems to hide a crouching figure. Every gap in the wall seems to frame a climbing enemy. Your mind starts playing tricks on you, showing you movement where there is none, creating threats out of nothing more than wind and darkness and your own growing fear. The wind is constant up here, cutting through your cloak like it's made of paper instead of wool. It carries sounds from the world below, distorted and mysterious. The hoot of an owl becomes the signal of an enemy scout. The crack of a branch becomes the sound of a ladder being placed against the wall. The rustle of leaves becomes the whisper of approaching footsteps. Every sound could be nothing. Every sound could be everything. You find yourself walking faster, covering your section of wall in shorter and shorter intervals, turning around more and more frequently to check behind you. The paranoia is setting in, the occupational hazard of every night watchman. You're not just watching for enemies outside the walls anymore. You're watching for enemies that might already be inside. Enemies that might be climbing up behind you. Enemies that might be waiting in the shadows just beyond your torchlight. The castle's defensive design is based on the principle of layered security, multiple walls, towers at strategic points, kill zones where attackers can be trapped and eliminated. But all of these defenses depend on early warning, on guards like you spotting threats before they penetrate the outer perimeter. If you fail in your duty, if you miss the signs of an approaching attack, all those carefully planned defenses become useless. The weight of that responsibility sits on your shoulders like a lead cloak, making every shadow more ominous, every sound more threatening. Time moves differently in the darkness. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like days. You've been on watch for what feels like half the night, but when you look at the position of the stars, you realize it's been less than 2 hours. You have at least 6 more hours until dawn. 6 more hours of this slowly mounting terror. 6 more hours of fighting the urge to abandon your post and run screaming into the night. The stars themselves become your timepiece, the only reliable way to track the passage of hours when every minute stretches into eternity. You learn to read their positions, to calculate how much of your watch remains based on the slow rotation of constellations across the sky. It's a skill that all night guards develop out of necessity, a way to maintain some sense of progress through the endless dark hours. But even this small comfort becomes a source of anxiety when clouds obscure the stars, leaving you without any way to measure time's passage, except the growing exhaustion in your bones. As the night deepens, the cold begins to work its way into your bones with the persistence of a master torturer. It starts with your fingers and toes, turning them numb and clumsy. Then it moves up your limbs, making your muscles stiff and slow to respond. Your jaw aches from clenching your teeth to keep them from chattering, because the sound might mask the approach of enemies, and because showing weakness, even to yourself, feels like the first step toward giving up entirely. The leather of your gloves has gone rigid in the cold, making it difficult to grip your spear properly. You flex your fingers repeatedly, trying to keep the blood flowing, but each movement sends sharp pains shooting up your arms. You wonder how the veterans do it, how they manage to stay alert and functional through nights like this. But then you remember the look in their eyes, the 1,000-yard stare of men who have seen too much and slept too little. Maybe they don't manage it. Maybe they just survive it, one night at a time, until it finally breaks them. The cold is more than just discomfort. It's a tactical disadvantage that could get you killed. Numb fingers can't grip weapons effectively. Stiff muscles respond slowly to threats. Chattering teeth make it impossible to hear approaching enemies. The cold doesn't just make you miserable, it makes you incompetent, and incompetence in a guard is measured in body counts. You've heard stories of guards who froze to death at their posts, found in the morning like ice sculptures, still standing at attention but no longer breathing. Your breath creates clouds of vapor that obscure your vision, and you find yourself breathing through your nose to minimize the effect, which makes you feel like you're suffocating. Every breath you take feels like it might be your last warm one. The cold air burns your lungs, and you start to worry that you might freeze to death before any enemies even show up. That would be embarrassing. Dying on a watch not from heroic combat, but from simple exposure. Found in the morning like a frozen statue with a spear in its hand. The castle's heating system, such as it is, consists mainly of fireplaces in the main living areas and the body heat of people sleeping in close quarters. The towers and wall walks receive no such comfort, leaving guards to face the elements with nothing but their own body heat and whatever protective clothing they can layer on. In winter, when temperatures drop below freezing and the wind howls across the battlements like a living thing, standing watch becomes an exercise in pure endurance rather than military vigilance. The torch flame dances wildly in the wind, casting shifting shadows that seem to move with purpose and malice. You've started to recognize certain shadows as regular features of your environment. The shadow cast by a particular stone, the shadow of a hanging rope, the shadow of your own body. But knowing what causes them doesn't make them any less unsettling. Your mind keeps trying to turn them into human figures, crouching attackers, climbing invaders. You're not just fighting the cold and the darkness anymore. You're fighting your own mind, which seems determined to create threats where none exist. You catch yourself spinning around to face imaginary attackers, raising your spear to ward off shadows, stepping backward from movements that turn out to be nothing more than the flicker of your torch. You're becoming your own worst enemy, and you're only 3 hours into a 12-hour watch. The human brain, it turns out, is not designed for this kind of prolonged sensory deprivation. When deprived of sufficient visual input, it begins to manufacture its own, creating hallucinations and phantom movements to fill the void. Add exhaustion, cold, and fear to the mix, and you have a recipe for complete psychological breakdown. The castle's commanders know this, of course, but they also know that someone has to stand watch, and humans are the only early warning system available in a world without electronics or advanced technology. The silence is almost worse than any sound would be. Not complete silence, of course. There's always the wind, the occasional settling of stone, the distant sound of your fellow guards moving around in other parts of the castle, but the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of how alone you are, how isolated, how utterly vulnerable. If something happened to you up here, how long would it take for anyone to notice? How long would it take for someone to find your body? You start to understand why so many guards go mad. It's not just the lack of sleep, though that's part of it. It's not just the constant fear, though that's part of it too. It's the way the job strips away everything human about you, reducing you to nothing more than a pair of eyes and ears attached to a body that's slowly freezing to death. You're not a person anymore. You're a sentinel, a human alarm system, a piece of castle equipment that happens to be made of flesh and bone instead of stone and iron. The worst part is the responsibility. Every person sleeping peacefully in the castle below is depending on you to keep them safe. The Lord and his family, the servants, the other guards, the children who don't even know that dangers exist in the world, all of their lives are in your hands. If you fail, if you miss something, if you let your guard down for even a moment, they could all die. That knowledge sits in your stomach like a cold stone, making every shadow more threatening, every sound more ominous. The castle houses nearly 200 people when fully occupied. Nobles and their families, servants and craftsmen, guards and soldiers, clergy and guests. Each of them trust that the defensive systems will keep them safe, that the guards on the walls will spot trouble before it arrives, that they can sleep peacefully knowing someone else is watching for threats. Most of them have probably never even thought about the psychological cost of that vigilance, the way it slowly eats away at the watchers' minds and leaves them hollow shells of their former selves. You try to distract yourself by thinking about other things, your family, your home, the warm meal you'll have when your watch is over. But your mind keeps snapping back to the present, to the darkness, to the growing certainty that something terrible is about to happen. It's not rational, this certainty, but rationality is a luxury you can't afford. Up here, paranoia isn't a mental illness, it's a survival skill. The wind carries new sounds now, or maybe you're just hearing them for the first time. The distant howl of wolves, reminding you that humans aren't the only predators roaming the night. The creak of trees bending in the wind, which could be trees or could be siege ladders being moved into position. The splash of water from the moat below, which could be fish jumping or could be swimmers approaching the castle walls. Every few minutes you walk to each side of your section of wall and peer over the edge, straining your eyes to see movement in the darkness below. The courtyard is a pool of black shadow, broken only by the occasional torch in a window or doorway. The moat is invisible, its presence marked only by the smell of stagnant water and the sound of something large moving through it. Could be fish, could be water rats, could be enemy divers with knives between their teeth. The moat is one of the castle's primary defensive features, a water-filled ditch that surrounds the entire structure and makes direct assault much more difficult. But it also creates blind spots where enemies could potentially hide while preparing their attack, and the sound of water masks other noises that might indicate approaching threats. In daylight, you can see clearly across the moat to the far shore, but at night it becomes a black void that could hide an entire army. You realize you're holding your breath without meaning to, listening so intently for sounds of danger that you've forgotten to breathe normally. When you finally exhale, the sound seems impossibly loud in the stillness, and you immediately worry that you've given away your position to any enemies who might be lurking nearby. You try to breathe more quietly, but that just makes you more conscious of every breath, more aware of how much noise you're making simply by being alive. The paranoia is becoming a living thing now, a creature that feeds on darkness and fear and grows stronger with every passing minute. It whispers in your ear that the shadows are moving when they shouldn't be. It tells you that the sounds you're hearing aren't natural. It insists that you're being watched, that somewhere in the darkness below, hostile eyes are tracking your every movement, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You try to shake off these thoughts, to focus on the job at hand, but the job at hand is standing still and watching nothing happen, which gives your mind far too much freedom to wander into dangerous territory. You find yourself making bargains with God, promising to be a better person if you can just survive this one night. You wonder if the previous guard felt the same way. You wonder if Thomas is lying awake in his straw bed right now, grateful to be off watch and dreading his next turn. The castle's chapel is visible from your position on the tower, its windows glowing faintly with the light of candles that burn through the night. You can't hear the prayers being said there, but you know that at least one priest maintains a vigil, offering intercession for the souls of all who dwell within the castle walls. It's a comforting thought, knowing that someone is awake and praying while you stand watch, but it also reminds you of how many people are depending on your vigilance for their continued existence. You've started to count things as a way of maintaining focus and fighting off the hallucinations that threaten to overwhelm your perception. Steps taken during each patrol of your section. Stones visible in the parapet. Stars visible through breaks in the clouds. Sounds heard during each hour of watch. It's a technique Thomas taught you, a way of keeping your mind occupied with concrete, measurable realities instead of letting it drift into the realm of imagination and fear. But even counting becomes a source of anxiety when the numbers don't add up the way they should. When you count more steps than usual, you wonder if you're walking faster because you're nervous. When you count fewer steps, you worry that you're not covering your assigned area properly. When you count more sounds than normal, you fear that something is stirring in the darkness. When you count fewer sounds, you wonder if everything has gone unnaturally quiet because predators are approaching. By the 4th hour, you've entered what the veteran guards call the haunting hours. That period of the night when exhaustion and fear combine to create a waking nightmare where reality and imagination blur together until you can't tell one from the other. Your eyes burn from straining to see in the darkness, and you've started to see things that definitely aren't there. Faces in the stone wall, figures moving in the distance, hands reaching up from the edge of the parapet. You know these visions aren't real. The rational part of your mind understands that sleep deprivation and stress can cause hallucinations, that your brain is trying to make sense of incomplete information by filling in the gaps with whatever fears happen to be lurking in your subconscious. But knowing something isn't real doesn't make it any less terrifying when you see it. Your body reacts to these phantom threats as if they were genuine, flooding your system with adrenaline that has nowhere to go, leaving you shaky and exhausted. The cold has moved beyond discomfort into the realm of actual pain. Your feet have gone completely numb inside your boots, which is almost worse than when they were hurting, because now you can't tell if you're standing properly or if you're about to lose your balance and tumble off the wall. You stamp your feet periodically to try to restore feeling, but the sound echoes off the stone and seems loud enough to wake the dead, let alone alert any living enemies who might be in the area. Your hands are in even worse shape. Despite your gloves, your fingers have turned white and stiff, and you're having trouble maintaining your grip on the spear. You've dropped it twice already, and each time the clatter of metal on stone made you certain that you'd just announced your position to every hostile force within miles. You try warming your hands by holding them near the torch flame, but that means taking your eyes off the darkness beyond the walls, and you can't shake the feeling that the moment you look away will be the moment when everything goes wrong. The torch itself is becoming a problem. You've been carrying it for hours now, and the constant weight is making your arm ache. Worse, the flame is getting smaller as the fuel burns down, and you're starting to worry about what will happen when it finally goes out. You have backup torches, but lighting a new one in this wind seems like an impossible task, and the thought of being left in complete darkness makes your stomach clench with terror. Sleep is trying to claim you despite the cold and fear. Your eyelids feel like they're made of lead, and keeping them open requires a constant effort of will. You've caught yourself nodding off several times, jerking awake with a start that nearly sends you over the edge of the wall. Each time you wake up, there's a moment of pure panic as you try to remember where you are and how long you might have been unconscious. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes, could have been long enough for an entire army to scale the walls and take positions around you. You try walking faster to stay awake, but that just makes you more tired. You try standing perfectly still to conserve energy, but that makes the cold worse and gives your mind more opportunity to wander into dark territory. You try thinking about pleasant things, but pleasant thoughts seem obscene in this environment, like bringing flowers to a funeral. The darkness demands dark thoughts. The night insists on fear. The sounds from beyond the walls are getting worse, or maybe you're just getting better at hearing them. What started as the whisper of wind through trees has become the murmur of voices planning an attack. What began as the rustle of small animals has become the careful footsteps of soldiers moving into position. You know you're probably imagining most of it, but probably isn't good enough when people's lives are at stake. You have to assume every sound is a threat until proven otherwise. You find yourself talking to yourself, just to hear a human voice, even if it's your own. "Nothing there," you whisper, as you peer over the parapet at a particularly suspicious shadow. Just your mind playing tricks. But even your own voice sounds strange in the darkness, hollow and uncertain, and after a while, You stop talking because the sound seems to attract things from the darkness rather than ward them off. The worst part is the waiting, not knowing if tonight will be the night when the enemies come, or if you'll spend 12 hours in terror over nothing more dangerous than wind and wildlife. The uncertainty is eating you alive from the inside, making every minute feel like an hour, every hour feel like a day. You start to understand why some guards eventually throw themselves from the walls, not because they're attacked by enemies, but because the waiting becomes unbearable. You've memorized every stone in your section of wall, every gap in the parapet, every shadow cast by your torch. You know the pattern of the wind, the rhythm of the sounds from below, the way the darkness seems to pulse and breathe like a living thing. This knowledge doesn't make you feel safer. If anything, it makes you more aware of anything that doesn't fit the pattern, more sensitive to any change in the normal routine of night sounds. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since before your watch began. But the thought of food makes you nauseous. Fear has a way of killing appetite, and the constant adrenaline has turned your digestive system into a churning mess of acid and anxiety. You have a piece of bread in your pouch, but the idea of taking your attention away from the darkness long enough to eat seems impossibly risky. Time has become your enemy now. Each minute that passes brings you closer to dawn and safety, but it also brings you deeper into exhaustion and hallucination territory. You're not sure which will come first, sunrise or complete mental breakdown. You're not even sure there's a difference anymore. The veteran guards who survive year after year of night watches don't look entirely sane. And now you're beginning to understand why. Hour 6 arrives like a sentence of death. You're past exhaustion now, running on nothing but fear and stubbornness, your body operating on some primitive level that predates conscious thought. Your legs shake with fatigue, and you have to lean against the parapet to stay upright. The cold has penetrated so deeply into your bones that you can't remember what warmth feels like. Your torch flame has shrunk to a tiny flicker that barely illuminates your own hand, let alone the darkness beyond. This is when things start to go seriously wrong, not because enemies finally attack, that might almost be a relief at this point, but because your mind finally begins to break under the strain. The hallucinations become more vivid, more persistent, more convincing. You see entire armies massing in the darkness below, siege ladders rising against the walls, grappling hooks flying through the air. You raise your spear to fight off attackers who aren't there, shout warnings to guards who can't hear you, blow your horn to alert the castle to threats that exist only in your deteriorating mind. The line between reality and hallucination becomes so blurred that you can no longer trust your own perceptions. When you see movement in the shadows, you don't know if it's a real threat or another phantom conjured by your exhausted brain. When you hear sounds from the darkness, you can't tell if they're genuine dangers or auditory hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation and fear. Your mind has become an unreliable narrator of your own experience, and that unreliability could get everyone in the castle killed. The sound of your own horn in the darkness is like a thunderclap, echoing off the stone walls and rolling across the countryside like the voice of doom itself. Within minutes, you can hear activity throughout the castle as guards rush to their positions. Servants wake from sleep, weapons are drawn, and armor hastily donned. Footsteps pound on stairs, voices shout urgent questions, and the entire fortress transforms from a place of peaceful slumber into a hive of military activity. But there's nothing there. No enemies, no attack, no threat beyond your own failing sanity. As torches begin to appear on other sections of the wall and voices call out asking for your status, you realize what you've done. You've raised a false alarm, committed the cardinal sin of a night watchman. You've proven that you can't tell the difference between reality and imagination, that you're unreliable, that you're dangerous to the very people you're supposed to protect. The castle's emergency response system swings into action with practiced efficiency. Guards pour out of the barracks, taking positions along the walls and in the towers. Archers string their bows and position themselves at strategic points. The main gate is sealed and barricaded. Servants extinguish unnecessary lights and help move valuable items to secure locations. The entire complex becomes a fortress prepared for siege, all because you couldn't tell the difference between shadows and soldiers. The shame burns hotter than the cold as you try to explain what you saw, why you sounded the alarm, what convinced you that the castle was under attack. But even as you speak, the words sound hollow and unconvincing. How do you explain that you saw things that weren't there? How do you justify panicking an entire fortress over shadows and fears? How do you admit that the darkness has beaten you without appearing weak or cowardly? Other guards arrive at your position, grizzled veterans who take one look at your wide eyes and shaking hands and immediately understand what happened. They've all been there, all experienced the night terrors that come with prolonged exposure to darkness and fear. But understanding doesn't make it acceptable. Empathy doesn't erase the fact that you failed in your most basic duty. Sergeant Williams is the first to reach you, a 20-year veteran whose calm demeanour has seen the castle through countless genuine emergencies. He doesn't appear angry or disappointed, just tired in the way that comes from dealing with the same problems over and over again. He's seen dozens of guards break during night watch, and he knows the signs better than anyone. The trembling hands, the wide eyes, the desperate need to justify actions that can't be justified. "What did you see, lad?" he asks quietly, and there's no judgment in his voice, which somehow makes it worse. You'd rather face anger than this weary understanding, this resignation that suggests your failure was inevitable rather than surprising. Captain Morrison climbs the tower himself, a man whose presence usually brings comfort, but tonight feels like judgment incarnate. He's a fair leader, known for taking care of his men, but fairness and kindness don't extend to guards who can't be trusted to tell the difference between threats and phantoms. He studies your face in the flickering torchlight, noting the exhaustion, the fear, the obvious signs of someone who has pushed too far past their limits. "What did you see?" he asks quietly, and there's no anger in his voice, which somehow makes it worse. Anger you could handle. Disappointment is devastating. You try to explain, but the words come out jumbled and incoherent. How do you describe seeing an army that wasn't there? How do you convey the absolute certainty you felt that the castle was under attack when clearly it wasn't? How do you make someone understand that for a moment, just a moment, your mind created a reality so vivid and convincing that acting on it seemed like the only rational choice? The captain listens without interruption, nodding occasionally, his expression revealing nothing. When you finish, he's quiet for a long moment, studying the darkness beyond the walls, as if he might be able to see whatever drove you to sound the alarm. Finally, he turns back to you with an expression that might be sympathy or might be pity. "This happens more than you might think," he says finally. "Night watch breaks something in a man's mind. The darkness, the isolation, the constant fear. It's not natural for humans to endure that kind of pressure for extended periods. Some men last longer than others, but eventually, everyone reaches their breaking point." He tells you about other guards who have sounded false alarms, men who let the darkness and isolation drive them to see threats where none existed. The miller's son who swore he saw siege towers approaching through the forest. The blacksmith's apprentice who was convinced that swimmers were crossing the moat. The baker's boy who raised the alarm because he heard enemy voices planning an assault. Voices that turned out to be nothing more than wind through the trees. "The human mind isn't designed for this kind of work," the captain continues. "We ask men to stand alone in the dark, to stay alert for hours while fighting cold and exhaustion and fear, to make split-second decisions about life and death while operating on nothing but adrenaline and terror. It's a miracle anyone manages it at all. You want to argue, to insist that you can overcome this setback. That one false alarm doesn't define your entire career, but the words die in your throat because you know he's right. Something fundamental has changed in you during those 6 hours on the wall. The easy confidence you once had in your own perceptions is gone, replaced by a nagging doubt that will question every shadow, every sound, every instinct you have about potential threats. Go get some rest, he says simply. Thomas will take the remainder of your watch. It's not a punishment, exactly, but it's not a commendation either. You're being relieved of duty because you've proven you can't handle it. The knowledge sits in your stomach like a stone as you hand over your spear and torch to Thomas, who takes them without comment, but gives you a look that says he understands exactly what you're going through. He's been there too. They all have. Thomas has his own ritual for dealing with the stress of night watch. He carves small notches in his spear handle to mark each successful completion of duty, and he touches each notch before beginning a new watch as a reminder that he's survived before and can survive again. He's told you that he has nightmares about the watches where he didn't carve a notch, the times when he lost track of time or saw things that weren't there, but managed to avoid sounding a false alarm through luck rather than skill. The walk down from the tower feels like a descent into shame. Each step takes you further from the responsibility you failed to meet, deeper into the knowledge that you're not cut out for this life. The other guards you pass don't say anything, but you can feel their eyes on you, measuring, judging, filing away the information that you're the one who sounded false alarms, who couldn't handle a simple night watch without losing his mind. The spiral staircase seems longer on the way down, each step echoing with the weight of your failure. The torch brackets along the walls cast dancing shadows that remind you of the hallucinations that drove you to panic, and you find yourself flinching away from movements that you know are just tricks of light, but can't help perceiving as threats. The damage to your perception is already permanent, you realize. Even here, surrounded by stone walls and fellow guards, you can't trust your own eyes. Back in the barracks, you collapse onto your pile of straw, but sleep doesn't come. Your mind is still racing, still seeing threats in every shadow, still replaying the moment when you were absolutely certain that enemies were scaling the walls. The worst part is that you're still not entirely convinced you were wrong. The darkness beyond the castle walls feels malevolent, full of watching eyes and hostile intentions. Maybe you didn't see an army because there wasn't one to see yet. Maybe your alarm prevented an attack rather than imagining one. But maybe doesn't matter in this profession. Maybe gets people killed. Maybe means you can't be trusted with the lives of others. Maybe means you're not a guard anymore. You're just another failed recruit who couldn't handle the pressure of standing alone in the dark with nothing but your courage and a dying torch. The other guards return from their emergency positions one by one, each of them pausing to look at you as they settle back into their bedding, some with sympathy, some with understanding, some with the kind of contempt reserved for those who cry wolf in a world where real wolves are always lurking just beyond the firelight. None of them say anything, but their silence speaks volumes. Garrett, the veteran who woke you for your watch, sits heavily on his straw mattress and begins removing his equipment with the mechanical movements of someone who has done this thousands of times before. He doesn't look at you directly, but you can sense his disappointment. He'd recommended you for night watch duty, vouched for your readiness, and now his judgment has been called into question along with yours. First time's always the hardest, he says quietly, not looking up from his boots. Some men take to it natural-like, others need more seasoning, and some. He trails off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but you know what he was going to say. Some never take to it at all. You lie there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the castle settling back into its nighttime routine. And you know that your life as a guard is over. Not because you'll be dismissed. Captain Morrison is too kind for that. But because you'll never again be able to trust your own perceptions when it matters most. How can you stand watch when you can't tell the difference between enemies and shadows? How can you protect others when you can't trust your own mind? Dawn comes slowly, creeping across the sky like a cautious animal, and with it comes the full weight of what your failure means. Not just for you, but for everyone who depends on the guard system to keep them safe. As sunlight finally penetrates the castle, revealing the empty countryside beyond the walls, the absence of any real threat makes your false alarm seem even more inexcusable. The enemy army you were so certain you saw has vanished like morning mist, leaving nothing behind but questions about your reliability and fitness for duty. The morning light reveals details that were invisible in the darkness. The peaceful forest where you imagined enemy forces massing. The empty road where you thought you heard marching feet. The quiet moat where you were convinced swimmers were approaching the walls. Everything looks harmless and innocent in daylight, making your nighttime terrors seem not just wrong, but foolish. How could you have been so certain about threats that obviously never existed? You don't report for duty that evening when the assignments are handed out. Captain Morrison finds you in the stables, where you've been hiding among the horses, mucking out stalls, with the kind of desperate energy that comes from trying to prove you're still useful for something. He doesn't order you back to watch duty. Instead, he sits down on a bale of hay and studies you with the tired eyes of a man who has seen too many good soldiers broken by the demands of their profession. "It happens to everyone," he says finally, and there's no judgment in his voice, only weariness. The night watch breaks something in a man's mind. Some recover from it, some don't. The question is which kind of man you are. He tells you about other guards who have sounded false alarms, men who let the darkness and isolation drive them to see threats where none existed. Some of them found ways to overcome their failure, to rebuild their confidence and return to duty. Others never recovered, spending the rest of their service on day shifts or kitchen duty or other assignments that didn't require them to stand alone in the dark with only their judgment to guide them. The thing about standing watch, the captain continues, is that it changes you. Every night you spend staring into darkness, wondering if tonight will be the night when death comes climbing over the walls, takes something from you. Most men don't notice it at first. They think they're the same person they were before they started standing guard. But the darkness leaves marks on a man's soul, and eventually those marks become scars that never quite heal. The captain has served for 30 years, starting as a common soldier and working his way up through the ranks. He's commanded guards through sieges and battles, seen men die heroically and others break under pressure that would crush most people. His understanding of what night watch does to a person comes from hard experience, from watching good men slowly deteriorate under the weight of too many dark hours and too much responsibility. You want to argue, to insist that you can overcome this setback, that one false alarm doesn't define your entire career. But the words die in your throat because you know he's right. Something fundamental has changed in you during those 6 hours on the wall. The easy confidence you once had in your own perceptions is gone, replaced by a nagging doubt that will question every shadow, every sound, every instinct you have about potential threats. The captain leaves you with a choice. You can request transfer to day duty, serving as a gate guard or patrol soldier, where the sunlight keeps the phantoms at bay and the presence of other guards provides a check on your perceptions. It's not shameful work, and many good men serve their entire careers in daylight positions. Or you can try to work through your fears, spending shorter watches with experienced partners until you regain the confidence to stand alone in the dark. Both options feel like admissions of failure, but the captain assures you that failure is just another word for learning, and the guard service has a room for men who have learned hard lessons about their own limitations. A man who knows his weaknesses, he says, is often more valuable than one who thinks he has none. The conversation takes place in the stable because it's one of the few places in the castle where you can have privacy during daylight hours. The horses provide a comforting presence, large animals that respond to immediate threats with obvious fear, serving as a reality check for your own perceptions. If the horses are calm, you tell yourself, then there's probably nothing to worry about. It's a simple test, but one that helps ground you in objective reality. Over the following days, you watch other guards prepare for their night watches with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. How do they do it? How do they climb those tower stairs night after night, knowing what waits for them in the darkness? How do they maintain their sanity in the face of such prolonged isolation and fear? The answer, you gradually realize, is that many of them won't. The veteran guards all carry scars from their service, visible and invisible marks left by years of standing between civilization and chaos. Some have developed nervous habits, constant fidgeting, repetitive movements, the need to check and recheck their equipment. Others have grown distant and withdrawn, as if part of them never quite returned from those dark hours on the walls. A few have turned to drink, seeking in ale and wine the peace they can no longer find in sleep. They're all damaged in one way or another, all carrying the weight of too many dark nights and too many imagined threats that might have been real. Marcus, one of the senior guards, has developed a twitch in his left eye that becomes more pronounced when he's tired or stressed. He claims it started after a particularly difficult watch, during which he was convinced that enemies were tunneling under the castle walls, a threat that turned out to be nothing more than rats in the cellar. The twitch serves as a constant reminder of that night, a physical manifestation of the psychological damage that night watch inflicts on even the strongest minds. You realize that your false alarm wasn't an aberration, it was an inevitability. Every guard who serves long enough on night watch eventually reaches a breaking point where exhaustion and fear overcome judgment. Most are just lucky enough to break when there are no real consequences, when their failure results in nothing more than lost sleep and bruised pride. You were unlucky enough to break at a moment when your failure became public, visible, a matter of record. But perhaps that public failure is also a gift. It forces you to confront the reality of what this job does to a person's mind, to acknowledge that the human psyche isn't designed to handle prolonged exposure to darkness and isolation. It makes you choose between denial and acceptance, between pretending you're fine and admitting that you're damaged. The castle operates on a system of shared responsibility, where the failure of one person can endanger everyone else. In such an environment, admitting weakness takes a special kind of courage, because it means accepting that you can no longer be relied upon for certain duties. It means stepping back from positions of responsibility and finding new ways to contribute to the common defense. The choice, when it comes, is easier than you expected. You request assignment to day patrol, where you can serve with honor while keeping your demons in the daylight, where they're easier to manage. It's not the career you imagined when you first put on a guard's uniform, but it's the career that allows you to sleep at night without seeing enemies in every shadow. Captain Morrison approves your request without comment, but there's something that might be respect in his eyes when he signs the transfer orders. You've chosen wisdom over pride, self-awareness over stubborn denial. In a profession where the line between courage and foolishness is often measured in heartbeats, knowing when to step back is its own form of bravery. Day duty brings its own challenges and responsibilities, but they're challenges you can meet without questioning your own sanity. You stand guard at gates where you can see clearly for miles in every direction. You patrol roads where threats are visible and immediate rather than imagined and psychological. You escort merchants and dignitaries through countryside where dangers are real and concrete rather than phantom and hallucinatory. The transition isn't easy. Your first few days on day duty are marked by hypervigilance and jumpiness, reactions honed by your night watch experience that don't quite fit the more relaxed atmosphere of daylight service. You flinch at shadows that are obviously harmless, spin around to face threats that obviously don't exist, and generally behave like someone who's seen too much darkness and doesn't quite trust the light. But gradually, your nerves settle. The presence of other guards provides reassurance and reality checks. The ability to see clearly for long distances eliminates the uncertainty that plagued your night watches. The warmth of sunlight and the normal sounds of daily life help restore your confidence in your own perceptions. You're still a guard, still serving an important function, still protecting the people of the castle. You're just doing it in a way that doesn't require you to sacrifice your sanity. Years pass, and you build a respectable career as a day guard, earning the trust of your commanders and the respect of your fellow soldiers. You serve at gates and patrol roads, escort merchants and guard dignitaries, perform all the duties that require courage and skill, but not the particular kind of mental fortitude needed to stand alone in darkness. It's good work, honourable work, and you tell yourself that you're content with the path your life has taken. But the night watches haunt you still, not in the way you might expect. You don't wake screaming from nightmares or jump at every shadow during the day. Instead, they've left you with a deep understanding of human vulnerability, of how quickly a strong mind can be reduced to a quivering mass of fears and uncertainties when pushed beyond its natural limits. The experience has given you a unique perspective on the nature of courage and fear. You understand now that bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to function despite it, and that even the bravest people have breaking points beyond which they cannot be expected to perform. This knowledge makes you more compassionate toward others who struggle with their duties, more understanding of human limitations, more aware of the psychological costs of the work you all do. You watch new recruits preparing for their first night watches with a mixture of sympathy and dread, knowing what awaits them in those dark hours on the walls. Some of them swagger with false confidence, boasting about how they'll never break, how they're made of sterner stuff than the guards who came before them. Others show appropriate nervousness, asking questions about what to expect, how to manage the fear, what signs to watch for that might indicate approaching madness. To the first group, you say nothing. They'll learn soon enough that courage has its limits, that bravery is a finite resource that can be exhausted like any other. To the second group, you offer what comfort you can, practical advice about staying warm, about recognizing the difference between real threats and phantom ones, about the importance of knowing when to ask for help. But mostly, you try to prepare them for the fundamental truth that no amount of training can really convey, that standing guard in the darkness changes you in ways that can't be undone. It strips away illusions about your own strength and reveals the fragile nature of human consciousness. It teaches you that the line between sanity and madness is much thinner than most people realize, and that crossing it doesn't require any dramatic trauma, just enough time alone with your fears in a place where help seems impossibly far away. Some nights, when you're lying in your warm bed listening to the wind howl outside, you think about the guards who are standing watch at that very moment. Young men and old veterans, all of them fighting the same battle against cold and darkness and the gradual erosion of their own certainty. You wonder how many of them will make it through their watches without breaking, how many will sound false alarms or abandon their posts, or simply lose their minds entirely. You've learned that the stories about heroic guards single-handedly defending castles against overwhelming odds are mostly fantasy. Real guard duty isn't about heroic last stands or dramatic sword fights. It's about endurance, about lasting through night after night of nothing happening while staying alert enough to respond if something finally does. It's about maintaining your sanity in a job that seems specifically designed to destroy it. The true heroes of castle defense aren't the guards who fight off armies of attackers. They're the ones who stand watch for decades without ever seeing an enemy, who sound alarms for real threats instead of imaginary ones, who somehow manage to keep their minds intact despite years of exposure to the kind of isolation and fear that would break most people in a matter of hours. Your own experience has taught you that heroism isn't always about dramatic gestures or spectacular victories. Sometimes it's about the quiet courage to admit when you've reached your limits, to step back from responsibilities you can no longer handle safely, to find new ways to serve that don't require you to sacrifice your mental health. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is recognize your own humanity and work within its constraints rather than pretending they don't exist. You think about Thomas sometimes, the veteran guard, who relieved you on that terrible night when you finally broke. He continued standing night watches for another 3 years after your incident, night after night, alone on the walls with nothing but darkness and his own gradually deteriorating mental state for company. When he finally retired from night duty, it wasn't because of a dramatic breakdown like yours. It was because he simply couldn't trust his eyes anymore, couldn't tell the difference between movement and stillness, couldn't rely on his senses to distinguish between real threats and phantom ones. He moved to day duty like you did, but unlike you, he never seemed to recover from his years in the darkness. He developed a nervous habit of constantly looking over his shoulder, as if expecting attack from behind. He jumped at sudden noises and couldn't stand to be in rooms without multiple exits. He aged rapidly, his hair going white and his face developing deep lines that spoke of too many nights spent staring into an abyss that eventually started staring back. Thomas died in his sleep 5 years after leaving night duty, and at his funeral, Captain Morrison spoke about the toll that guard service takes on a man's soul. "We ask them to stand between us and the darkness," he said, "but we don't always consider what that darkness does to them in return. Every man who serves on night watch sacrifices something of himself for our safety. Some give their lives in battle, but others give their peace of mind, their ability to sleep soundly, their trust in their own perceptions. Both kinds of sacrifice deserve our respect." The captain's words stayed with you because they articulated something you'd been struggling to understand about your own experience. Your failure that night wasn't really a failure at all. It was a sacrifice. You'd given up your confidence, your trust in your own judgment, your ability to stand alone in the dark without fear. In return, everyone in the castle had slept safely for one more night, protected by your vigilance, even if that vigilance had ultimately been directed at threats that existed only in your mind. The funeral was attended by guards from across the region, men who had served with Thomas or heard stories about his dedication to duty. Many of them bore the same haunted expression that had marked Thomas in his final years, the look of people who had seen too much darkness and could never quite escape it. You realized that you were looking at your own future if you had continued on the night watch. Not death in glorious battle, but slow psychological deterioration until nothing remained but a shell going through the motions of living. Years later, when young guards ask you about that night, about what it was like to break under the pressure of night watch, you tell them that it taught you the most important lesson of your career. That courage isn't about being unafraid, it's about doing your duty despite your fear. That strength isn't about never breaking, it's about finding ways to serve even after you've been broken. That honor isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest about your limitations and finding ways to contribute within those limitations. You tell them about the weight of darkness, about how it presses down on a man's mind until something has to give. You explain how isolation can make phantoms seem real and how exhaustion can turn shadows into enemies. You describe the terrible responsibility of being the only thing standing between sleeping innocents and whatever might be lurking in the night. But mostly, you try to help them understand that every guard who has ever served on night watch carries scars from the experience, visible or invisible, and that those scars are marks of honor rather than shame. They're proof that someone was willing to sacrifice their peace of mind for the safety of others, to stand alone in the dark so that others could sleep peacefully in the light. The castle still stands, its walls still manned by guards who climb those tower stairs every night and take their positions on the walls, despite knowing what waits for them in the darkness. Some of them will break as you did. Others will endure for years before the accumulated weight of too many dark nights finally crushes their spirits. A Few might even complete their service with their minds intact, though you've never met one who managed that particular miracle. But they all serve with honor, these guardians of the night, these sentinels who stand between civilization and chaos with nothing but their courage and a slowly dying torch to light their way. They know that the darkness will eventually claim something from them, their confidence, their sanity, their peace of mind, or their lives. They stand watch anyway, because someone has to, because the alternative is letting the darkness win without a fight. And in the end, that's what makes them heroes. Not their victories in battle, not their success in repelling attackers, but their willingness to face the darkness night after night, knowing that it will eventually break them, and standing guard anyway. They are the thin line of light that holds back the chaos, the human barriers that keep the nightmares at bay, the guardians who sacrifice their own peace so that others can sleep safely. You honor their service by remembering your own time on those walls, by carrying the weight of that experience without letting it destroy you, by finding ways to serve that don't require you to stand alone in the dark. You honor them by telling their stories, by helping others understand the true cost of keeping watch, by ensuring that their sacrifices are remembered and respected. The darkness is still out there, pressing against the walls, testing the resolve of each new generation of guards. It will always be there, patient and persistent, waiting for moments of weakness, ready to exploit any gap in vigilance. But as long as there are men and women willing to climb those tower stairs and take their positions on the walls, as long as there are guards willing to sacrifice their peace of mind for the safety of others, the darkness will not pass. They stand watch still, these guardians of the night, alone on their walls with nothing but courage and duty to sustain them. They stand watch, and the rest of us sleep safely because of their sacrifice. They stand watch, and the darkness has not yet won. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of those brave enough to face it anyway, night after night, until their watch is ended, and they can finally rest in the knowledge that they served with honor in humanity's longest war against the dark. In the end, your single night of terror on those walls taught you more about courage, sacrifice, and human nature than all your training combined. It showed you that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing your duty anyway. It revealed that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about finding new ways to serve after you've been broken. Most importantly, it demonstrated that honor isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest about your limitations and finding ways to contribute within them. The castle walls still stand strong, defended by a new generation of guards who face the same darkness that broke you, knowing that it might break them too. They climb those stairs each night because civilization requires guardians willing to pay whatever price the darkness demands. Their service continues yours. Their sacrifice honors yours. Their vigilance ensures that the light endures despite the endless night that presses against every wall, every door, every human heart that dares to hope for dawn. Recognize certain shadows as regular features of your environment. The shadow cast by a particular stone, the shadow of a hanging rope, the shadow of your own body. But knowing what causes them doesn't make them any less unsettling. Your mind keeps trying to turn them into human figures, crouching attackers, climbing invaders. You're not just fighting the cold and the darkness anymore. You're fighting your own mind, which seems determined to create threats where none exist. You catch yourself spinning around to face imaginary attackers, raising your spear to ward off shadows, stepping backward from movements that turn out to be nothing more than the flicker of your torch. You're becoming your own worst enemy, and you're only 3 hours into a 12-hour watch. The human brain, it turns out, is not designed for this kind of prolonged sensory deprivation. When deprived of sufficient visual input, It begins to manufacture its own, creating hallucinations and phantom movements to fill the void. Add exhaustion, cold, and fear to the mix, and you have a recipe for complete psychological breakdown. The castle's commanders know this, of course, but they also know that someone has to stand watch, and humans are the only early warning system available in a world without electronics or advanced technology. The silence is almost worse than any sound would be. Not complete silence, of course. There's always the wind, the occasional settling of stone, the distant sound of your fellow guards moving around in other parts of the castle, but the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of how alone you are, how isolated, how utterly vulnerable. If something happened to you up here, how long would it take for anyone to notice? How long would it take for someone to find your body? You start to understand why so many guards go mad. It's not just the lack of sleep, though that's part of it. It's not just the constant fear, though that's part of it too. It's the way the job strips away everything human about you, reducing you to nothing more than a pair of eyes and ears attached to a body that's slowly freezing to death. You're not a person anymore. You're a sentinel, a human alarm system, a piece of castle equipment that happens to be made of flesh and bone instead of stone and iron. The worst part is the responsibility. Every person sleeping peacefully in the castle below is depending on you to keep them safe. The Lord and his family, the servants, the other guards, the children who don't even know that dangers exist in the world. All of their lives are in your hands. If you fail, if you miss something, if you let your guard down for even a moment, they could all die. That knowledge sits in your stomach like a cold stone, making every shadow more threatening, every sound more ominous. The castle houses nearly 200 people when fully occupied. Nobles and their families, servants and craftsmen, guards and soldiers, clergy and guests. Each of them trusts that the defensive systems will keep them safe, that the guards on the walls will spot trouble before it arrives, that they can sleep peacefully knowing someone else is watching for threats. Most of them have probably never even thought about the psychological cost of that vigilance, the way it slowly eats away at the watchers' minds and leaves them hollow shells of their former selves. You try to distract yourself by thinking about other things, your family, your home, the warm meal you'll have when your watch is over. But your mind keeps snapping back to the present, to the darkness, to the growing certainty that something terrible is about to happen. It's not rational, this certainty, but rationality is a luxury you can't afford. Up here, paranoia isn't a mental illness, it's a survival skill. The wind carries new sounds now, or maybe you're just hearing them for the first time. The distant howl of wolves, reminding you that humans aren't the only predators roaming the night. The creak of trees bending in the wind, which could be trees, or could be siege ladders being moved into position. The splash of water from the moat below, which could be fish jumping or could be swimmers approaching the castle walls. Every few minutes, you walk to each side of your section of wall and peer over the edge, straining your eyes to see movement in the darkness below. The courtyard is a pool of black shadow, broken only by the occasional torch in a window or doorway. The moat is invisible, its presence marked only by the smell of stagnant water and the sound of something large moving through it. Could be fish, could be water rats, could be enemy divers with knives between their teeth. The moat is one of the castle's primary defensive features, a water-filled ditch that surrounds the entire structure and makes direct assault much more difficult. But it also creates blind spots where enemies could potentially hide while preparing their attack, and the sound of water masks other noises that might indicate approaching threats. In daylight, you can see clearly across the moat to the far shore, but at night, it becomes a black void that could hide an entire army. You realize you're holding your breath without meaning to, listening so intently for sounds of danger that you've forgotten to breathe normally. When you finally exhale, the sound seems impossibly loud in the stillness. and you immediately worry that you've given away your position to any enemies who might be lurking nearby. You try to breathe more quietly, but that just makes you more conscious of every breath, more aware of how much noise you're making simply by being alive. The paranoia is becoming a living thing now, a creature that feeds on darkness and fear and grows stronger with every passing minute. It whispers in your ear that the shadows are moving when they shouldn't be. It tells you that the sounds you're hearing aren't natural. It insists that you're being watched, that somewhere in the darkness below, hostile eyes are tracking your every movement, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You try to shake off these thoughts, to focus on the job at hand. But the job at hand is standing still and watching nothing happen, which gives your mind far too much freedom to wander into dangerous territory. You find yourself making bargains with God, promising to be a better person if you can just survive this one night. You wonder if the previous guard felt the same way. You wonder if Thomas is lying awake in his straw bed right now, grateful to be off watch and dreading his next turn. The castle's chapel is visible from your position on the tower, its windows glowing faintly with the light of candles that burn through the night. You can't hear the prayers being said there, but you know that at least one priest maintains a vigil, offering intercession for the souls of all who dwell within the castle walls. It's a comforting thought, knowing that someone is awake and praying while you stand watch, but it also reminds you of how many people are depending on your vigilance for their continued existence. You've started to count things as a way of maintaining focus and fighting off the hallucinations that threaten to overwhelm your perception. Steps taken during each patrol of your section, stones visible in the parapet, stars visible through breaks in the clouds, sounds heard during each hour of watch. It's a technique Thomas taught you, a way of keeping your mind occupied with concrete, measurable realities instead of letting it drift into the realm of imagination and fear. But even counting becomes a source of anxiety when the numbers don't add up the way they should. When you count more steps than usual, you wonder if you're walking faster because you're nervous. When you count fewer steps, you worry that you're not covering your assigned area properly. When you count more sounds than normal, you fear that something is stirring in the darkness. When you count fewer sounds, you wonder if everything has gone unnaturally quiet because predators are approaching.